Productive Pastor 37, technical challenges or adaptive challenges. What's going on, y'all? Chad here, Productive Pastor. Great to have you on the show. Halfway point in a short little series I'm doing at the end of this year called Leading in Strange Times. You know, a lot of folks are thinking about 2023, starting to do their planning. They're thinking about the vision. You know, we're further out from the pandemic than we were 6 months ago, all that kind of stuff. And what I hear so much in the conversations I'm having with folks that I coach or I learn from and talk with is this idea of just knowing that something needs to move forward, but how hard it is just to kind of put your finger on it. And so I'm sharing this short little series about leading in strange times. What this is, second episode, I'm going to talk about technical and adaptive challenges. I'm really excited about this. We're going to just jump straight into it. Real quick before we do this, if you're not part of the Productive Pastor community on Facebook yet, that is a fantastic place. It's over 1,000 pastors that hang out there. There's great conversations, all those sorts of things. If you want to keep abreast of what's going on in Productive Pastor world, I encourage you to go over to Facebook, join the community. You can find the show notes for this episode at revchadbrooks.com/PPP/037. And you'll find your way to the Productive Pastor community over there. So let's just get straight into it. One of the books that I love is from a guy named Greg Satile. It's called Mapping Innovations. And this is what he says. Innovation arises when the right people, ideas, events combine to create something truly new and useful. If we want to innovate effectively, we need to look beyond linear sequences of events and take a broader view. Rather than striving to dream things up out of thin air, we need to look around us to see what we can combine to create novel solutions to important problems. That quote came across my ReadWise in the last week, and I dropped it in here because it really helps us understand this idea of how innovation works, how change works. If you've not read this book, and I talk about this book all the time, it's a great, easy little read to talk about how some amazing things like penicillin, some of Edison's inventions, this kind of stuff, how they really just happen when you having the right amount of what seems to be unrelated things going on at the same time, and the person is able to line it all up. So in the last episode, I started this short series about what does it mean to lead in strange times. And for me, this means learning to look past what I have done before personally, but also with ministry in the churches I lead. But a lot of this also arises deeply out of this conviction that so many of our solutions can be super prescriptive. They don't invite any sort of personalization or contextualization. And as two folks I've been learning a lot from the last year, Alan Roxburgh and Mark Branson, they talk about this in their book, Leadership, God's Agency and Disruption, that this sort of thing is participating in what they call modernity's wager, that a life can be lived well without God. And this might sound kind of wild for a pastor to talk about, but where they say the church enters into this is what they call technical rationality. This idea that we can do things on our own so well that we really don't need God with us. And I'll tell you, that gets us into a church leadership conversation so well. And I got really convicted about this earlier this year and spent some time just reframing things. Back in the summer, did an episode on personal ministry vision. Some of that processing was just thinking about this very same thing. But for someone who, my primary giftedness lies inside of futurism, strategic thinking, of creating new things and making them happen. I lead heavily in Clifton strengths with influencing strengths and then strategic strengths. Like, this is my wheelhouse, but the writing of these, Roxburgh and Wow Branson really started convicting me. I wanted to make sure that I was honestly listening, reflecting, and discerning what God is doing in my life, the communities around me, the places I pastor, and how I'm saying yes to it. And so the second episode in this series is about technical challenges versus adaptive challenges. In the first part of this conversation, we're going to live in theory land a little bit. And the second half of this conversation will be in action land. And I'm going to put a couple reflective practices for you. Now, if you feel stuck, if you feel like something just needs to happen, or you're trying to think with the future in mind, and you feel like you just don't have a grasp on it, I'm going to encourage you to think about these practices. Also, make sure you catch the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/037. And I'm going to have links to the books and everything else I share that might make you just be helpful inside of this conversation. So let's just get straight into the first part of this. This is the theory land. So what are technical solutions and what are adaptive solutions, or technical problems and adaptive problems? The folks that use this language, there's a lot of them, they kind of put other words on the backside, but they talk about technical and adaptive in the same way with all of this. And I'm going to talk about this briefly, but if you want to hear from someone who is significantly smarter than I am about this, go over to the Rebuilders podcast and listen to the episode called The Mistake So Many Leaders Are Making Right Now. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. This is Mark Sayers of Red Church, who also used to do the This Cultural Moment podcast. He is one of the brightest people in the Christian world right now, and he talks about this for a whole episode. So go check out what Sayers is saying about this. But, Walt Branson talks about this idea years ago in his book, Memories, Hopes, and Conversation. And it's a great book about congregational discernment and change. But this idea, I think, from what I can catch first of technical or adaptive challenge, comes from Ronald Heifetz and Marty Linsky and their book, Leadership on the Line. And Mark L. Branson quotes them in his book. But in short, a technical challenge is one that anyone can apply a simple rubric to find a solution. Like the toilets are overflowing in the youth wing, call the plumber, boom, it's done. There's a technical challenge that you solve through just technical means. You need to make sure the budget is met this year. Okay, we'll make sure we do stewardship campaign in November and send out quarterly letters, because that's what we have always done to make sure the budget has worked. In short, that's the deal. But you do things the way you've always done them because it's always worked. And if you don't have a thing that's always worked, surely someone out there is selling a program or a course, or there's a consultant that can tell you exactly what to do in order to get the result you need. And the need is manageable and the steps are clear. That's technical challenge, and that's how you fix it. That sounds totally like our world we live in right now, right? Doesn't it? We all know exactly what to do all the time. But an adaptive challenge is one where things seem to be a bit murky and you don't know necessarily the steps to take forward. Things are broken, or things need to change, but that's the only part about this that seems clear. It's the sort of thing where you sometimes feel like you need to learn something new before you can ever get into any sort of a solution-making situation. That's an adaptive challenge, and it requires adaptive leadership. How many times in the last few years did you have something really big come up and you tried to rise to the challenge using what has worked before or what you know how to do, and it simply just did not work? Like, it just did not happen. In a lot of ways, our entire world right now is like one giant adaptive challenge. So I encourage you, go listen to that episode of the Rebuilders podcast, seriously. But what can we do about it? So this is us moving out of theory land and moving into action land. Part 2, I'm calling this You Are the Expert, or Y'all Are the Expert. Now, why this? Well, I'm going to go back to an old evangelism phrase I've used for years, and it's this: you are the best person to reach the people that you know. It's almost like the more important or critical a problem is, the more contextual that you need to be. If something's really, really serious, you need the opposite of prescriptive. You need something that's very descriptive of who you are. So let me tell you the story of a capital campaign that we did a while back at the last church I was at, the church we started. We were portable. We were in desperate need of money to build a new building. We had land purchased and paid for. Some folks were very gracious, and we were able to do that cheaply. But we needed a pretty serious chunk of change. And so what do you do when you need to do a capital campaign? Well, you hire a campaign consulting firm to come in and help you do this. And so we went out there and we talked to a couple of them, and we went with the very best. And I called in some favors, and I think we got a little bit of a friends and family deal, and they sent us over a consultant, and he sent us a Trello board, and he said, listen, every single thing you need to do is on this Trello board. And if you do this Trello board, you will be successful. And they crunched our numbers and our money, and they said, okay, based off of your last 4 years of giving and everything else you've given us, we believe that you can raise X in your community. And we looked at the number, and it seemed low. And it also seemed like, wow, that's not nearly enough for this project. And we were kind of just bummed out about it. And so we kept working with them, and we realized, okay, something's better than nothing. Maybe we just thought we could do, maybe we thought we were cooler than we actually were. But their plan, like the guy was just like, just do the Trello board. It's going to work. And there's pieces of it that seemed like a good idea, but the short version of the story is they wanted us to spend so much money making things look super slick and clean, and hire an outside marketing agency to do all of our visuals to make sure things, really lined up and all this kind of stuff. And our leadership team around it was like, listen, this sounds silly for us trying to raise. I think that they told us that we were going to be able to raise around $135,000. And it was going to cost us, we paid them a pretty nice piece of money. And then also this is going to be another $20,000 to hire this marketing company and do all this literature and buy all this stuff. And our leaders were like, no, we're not going to do that. Like no, we're not. And we pretty much fired them. We told them, we know our community better than you do. The campaign consultant was from, another state, multiple miles away, thousands of miles away, different part of the country, whole 9 yards, just did not work. And we put our heads together, a bunch of fantastic leaders, and we did this, and we kind of followed a bit of what they said, but we also did a lot of things our own way, and we're really scrappy with it, and told people we're going to be scrappy with this. And we knocked it out of the park. I remember I was probably a little prideful the day we had our first internal round of pledges, and I sent the consultant a text message and said, hey, so we already have pledged more than you said we could before we brought this to the whole church. And we ended up, I think, more than doubling what they said we could bring in based off of our expected giving data. Now, that wasn't because we were smart. That wasn't because of anything special. It's just we knew our context. We did not realize that we were in an adaptive situation that was going to require adaptive leadership, but we were willing to just contextualize. Remember, I said, this is not prescriptive, this is descriptive. And this is a little bit of a peek into next week's episode, the final in this short little series. But in order to swim through adaptive waters, we have to stay positive. We have to know ourselves. We have to know what we enjoy, know who we are, know what we're good at, know what we've seen fruit from, all of those sorts of things. But we have to keep this in the positive. The moment we enter into negative waters, we're pretty much saying we are willing to drown in an adaptive crisis. So here's the exercise I want to give you. I told you we're going to go into action land. This is hardcore action land moment here. And you can do this for yourself, or you can do this for your church. And honestly, bonus points given when you bring more folks into this conversation. So if you do this with your staff or your leadership team or your ad council, whoever you have like that, bonus points if you do it that way. So how do you do this, or how do y'all do this? And this is what I want you to do. Grab a piece of paper, grab the whiteboard, get some snacks, settle in for some time, and just go through this. Number one, name the wins. Let's just say we're doing 2020 through 2022. So the last 2 years, like we're thinking, pandemic time here. Name the wins. Name the things okay, yes, this got pulled off. This was good. This was great. This was fun. People loved this. This was successful. When you felt like you were at your absolute best, name those things. Second thing is this: name the lessons that you learned. Think about, the ups and the downs, all the kind of stuff, but name the lessons you've learned. The third thing, name what worked really well. Okay. This is a little bit different from naming your wins, but just name what worked really well. Like you're saying, hey, you know what? We were able to maintain children's ministry throughout the entirety of lockdown. Name that. This is why this worked well. That's the whole thing. Why did something like this work well? That sort of thing. Number 4, name what didn't work well, but what you learned from. And if something failed miserably and you've never actually reflected back on it, take the time to reflect on what you think you could learn from. But You need to put together a big, huge list of all of the things to celebrate over the last 2 years. And once you have that list together, once I want you to think about all the good stuff that's up on there. And this is how I want you to filter it down another layer. What was luck? And then what was based off of your uniqueness? Think about this. What was luck and what was based off your uniqueness? And it's inside of when you realize that these are the things that worked, that did well because of your uniqueness, you're able to really begin to then clear out the murkiness from adaptive challenges, because you're able to contextualize and get descriptive about who you are and who your church is. And the more you can celebrate these things and share these things, the clearer it becomes, because any sort of future identity that you feel stressed out about or you need to strive for, anything like that, any sort of a healthy future is going to come from the things that you can celebrate that you already know how to do. Remember, a technical challenge is one where you're just able to just drop something on top of it and rock and roll. An adaptive challenge is sometimes those things where you say, I need to learn new things before I can even answer this question. So many times those new things like we feel like we have to learn are actually our past celebrations. Now, realize I'm not saying memorialization. I'm saying celebration, but think back to that good stuff. What was good because of your uniqueness and who you are. And you probably can actually learn some lessons inside of luck as well. But I'm telling you, take some time, and I'm not expecting you to do this over the holiday weekend, clearly. But think about that first week back in the office and come in and do these sorts of things with your crew. So in the next episode, the last episode of the year, the last episode of this series, all of it, we're going to talk about appreciative inquiry as a model to move through adaptive challenges. In many ways, it's a little bit longer conversation about what we just talked about when we were living in Action Land. Appreciative inquiry is the coaching model that I primarily use for most of my stuff. It's what I use for all of my work with Passion and Partnership. It's how we do things there, and it's turned into how I just do things on my own. It's simple, it's easy, and that sort of thing. So if you found this helpful, do me a favor, text or share this episode with a friend. Let them know, hey, I listen to Productive Pastor, and I'm really thinking about these things. I would love to think about them with you. And then come hang out with Productive Pastor with us. Remember the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/037. There's going to be all sorts of resources in there, links to these books, ways you can sign up for the Productive Pastor email list, all of that cool and fun stuff. And I hope you have a Merry Christmas. I'm not going to hear from you until after Christmas again. And so I hope you have a Merry Christmas. This is Chad. I will be back in the next episode with you to finish things out. And thanks so much for giving me 18 minutes and 15 seconds of your life. Talk to you later.